When it was announced that Microsoft would be acquiring Activision Blizzard for a whopping $68.7 billion back in January of 2022, it shook the gaming world. One of the biggest deals in history in the gaming landscape. Yeah, certainly the biggest. And, people were very curious to see how this would change the way Activision Blizzard is run and operated and how it would affect and impact its game releases, so on and so forth. And the deal was supposed to be done by summer of 2023. That is definitely no longer happening, as the CMA from the UK has decided to block this deal. And I'll get to that in a bit, but let's kind of go back a bit and see how things built up to this moment. So things actually looked positive for a second, because back in March of 2023, the CMA put out this statement where they said that they've received a significant amount of new evidence in response to its original provisional findings. The CMA was originally concerned that Xbox would have every incentive to pull Call of Duty from PlayStation, and that because of how big the Call of Duty franchise is, other platforms would have a difficult time competing if Xbox were to make Call of Duty exclusive to its platforms. But after Microsoft presented new evidence, the CMA had a different stance, saying that the most significant new evidence provided to the CMA relates to Microsoft's financial incentives to make Activision's games, including Call of Duty, exclusive to its own consoles. While the CMA's original analysis indicated that this strategy would be profitable under most scenarios, new data, which provides better insight into the actual purchasing behavior of Call of Duty gamers, indicates that this strategy would be significantly loss-making under any plausible scenario. This has been the main point of argument for PlayStation. Call of Duty is a big deal for us. If Xbox takes this away, then this is very anti-competitive. But Microsoft and Xbox have said time and again that Call of Duty will remain on PlayStation because they actually want Call of Duty to be as accessible as possible, and also because from a business standpoint, it would be stupid to pull Call of Duty from PlayStation. That would be profits and revenues lost because of just how well Call of Duty sells on PlayStation. Microsoft would straight up be shooting themselves in the foot by suddenly making Call of Duty exclusive to Xbox instead of allowing it to be sold on competing platforms. This seemed like a big win for Microsoft. This made it seem like this deal was as good as done, with Insider Gaming having reported here that Microsoft's chances of acquiring Activision has raised from 50 to 70%, according to Citibank. Though Microsoft wasn't completely in the clear because, as Tom Warren reported here on March 24th, the CMA still has concerns around the cloud gaming market, and the investigation remains on course for completion by the end of April. That's a very important point that we'll come back to, but building up to the end of April, now Sony Interactive Entertainment CEO Jim Ryan was none too happy about the CMA's deliberation back in March, stating that this reversal in position on the part of the CMA is surprising, unprecedented, and irrational. Sony even went as far as to argue a potential scenario where Xbox could intentionally sabotage Call of Duty on PlayStation in order to incentivize people to buy the game on Xbox and to migrate to the Xbox platform. Which, funny enough, this happened around the time when The Last of Us Part 1 released on PC in such a compromised state that you'd absolutely not want to play it on PC, but rather play it on, PlayStation. But more importantly, this is a really dumb argument. Microsoft and Xbox want Call of Duty to sell really well on as many platforms as possible because that's what's most profitable for the business. And to sabotage one platform and to potentially diminish sales potential and to get all this reputational backlash, it would be shooting themselves in the foot. There's no reason to do that. People also made fun of the fact that Jim Ryan at one point called Call of Duty gamers passionate, knowledgeable, and sophisticated, with Tom Warren saying, I guess nobody at Sony has ever used a headset in a Call of Duty lobby then. And then returning to Jim Ryan's imaginary scenario of Microsoft and Xbox sabotaging the PlayStation version of Call of Duty, Jim Ryan very dramatically said that our business would never recover if Microsoft degraded Call of Duty on PlayStation. And many people are baffled that Jim Ryan actually said this because, once again, this is such an unlikely scenario given how detrimental it be for Microsoft and Xbox's business? But secondly, the whole idea that we base our entire business around the success of Call of Duty on PlayStation, that's a really bad argument. What sells PlayStation consoles are those first-party exclusives, and it's like, are they a joke to you, Jim Ryan? Business lawyer Richard Hoeg put it aptly in a series of tweets where he said, if this were true, it isn't, it would evince a profound failure of leadership. You can never put the entire fate of your product/company in the hands of a wild-card third party. Couldn't agree more. Scrolling further down, and they didn't. Odd that Sony's arguments are increasingly, we are bad at our jobs and need someone to be saved from the fruits of our poor planning. Not sure how I would take that were I an investor. Even if it were true that Sony's business would never recover if Microsoft were to release a degraded version of Call of Duty, that would just be PlayStation placing too much of a reliance on a third-party product, and what they would be asking for here is essentially for a bailout for a poor decision. The poor decision to put so many of their eggs in the Call of Duty basket. I don't have a horse in this race, but the horse shit that Jim Ryan spews out constantly is just really laughable. But for Jim Ryan, Christmas came early because on April 26, 2023, the CMA ultimately decided that the Microsoft/Activision deal would be prevented to protect innovation and choice in cloud gaming. Yep, the CMA dropped the argument surrounding how exclusivity for major IPs like Call of Duty could severely impact competition negatively, and instead went for cloud gaming as an excuse to block this deal, which is a good time to bring up that tweet that I showed you from March 24th, 2023 from Tom Warren, stating that the CMA still has concerns around the cloud gaming market and the investigation remains on course for completion by the end of April. End of April has come and gone, and this was the CMA's deliberation to block the Microsoft acquisition of Activision Blizzard, to block this deal entirely. This is the only regulatory body that has blocked this deal. Plenty of others have already approved the acquisition, and not to mention that plenty of other game companies have said that we actually don't think it's anti-competitive for Xbox and Microsoft to buy Activision Blizzard. Sony is the only one who's come out and said, no, we gotta stop this right now. But yeah, the bottom line is, as Stephen Totilo summarizes, UK regulator blocks Microsoft Activision deal. Activision says they will work with Microsoft to appeal. It all came down to cloud gaming, and the UK was just not impressed with Microsoft's recent cloud deals. This is despite Microsoft's efforts to show that they want to play nice with all cloud gaming competitors. As Stephen Totilo put it here, what's stunning about this decision is that the console competition issue has loomed largest, and the CMA has backed off of that in March. Microsoft, meanwhile, announced a slew of cloud deals for Activision to address concerns, but today the UK said that these deals were simply too limited. The CMA apparently argued that an issue for them was Microsoft requiring Activision games be bought through specific storefronts or accessed through specific services like Game Pass, except Microsoft made deals with other cloud gaming platforms to ensure that Call of Duty would come to those platforms. Now that may not really happen. And then one more rebuttal on the part of the CMA is that it dismisses most of Microsoft's arguments about the Activision deal benefiting consumers as too meager, and it says the deal would have given Microsoft an incentive to raise the price of Game Pass. Now, one argument that I feel like doesn't really hold much ground is Microsoft's incentive to raise the price of Game Pass, because Microsoft raising prices on Game Pass at an unreasonable degree would just lead to subscriptions getting lost. And the whole draw of Game Pass is how affordable it is given the huge library of games that it gives you. And for those who can't spend $60, $70 on every new release, especially on Xbox's side of things, this is a very cost-effective way for them to be able to engage with some of these titles. If they were to raise prices on Game Pass, it'd be because of factors outside of, Call of Duty exclusivity or something. It'd be to potentially adjust for inflation and whatnot. From a business standpoint, they'd be shooting themselves in the foot by raising Game Pass prices too much, because it defeats the purpose of Game Pass. Microsoft and Xbox ultimately still have to be competitive by finding the right price point, the right balance, and Game Pass has found that, and Microsoft and Xbox have shown little signs of increasing prices to a degree where they would be exploiting, Call of Duty exclusivity or something. And Call of Duty exclusivity isn't even a thing that's really gonna happen because Microsoft has been making deals with competitors, be it in the cloud space or other platforms, and committing to releasing Call of Duty on other platforms because it's actually good for their business. Here's another argument the CMA made, presented by Charlie Intel via this tweet that reads, the UK CMA says Microsoft's deal would not accelerate Activision games on cloud services, as Activision would have to bring their titles to cloud gaming eventually. Says the 10-year deals are not enough, as cloud gaming is new and can change the industry in 10 years. So the CMA argues here that yes, Microsoft did make deals with cloud platforms to bring Activision Blizzard games over to those platforms should this deal go through, but these games were bound to go to cloud platforms anyways. These deals were bound to happen without Microsoft, where individual companies would have brought those games to cloud. And with Xbox's acquisition, it would make it so that that stuff is limited to Xbox's 10-year-long deal. And given Microsoft's ownership of Activision Blizzard titles, it could one day decide to engage anti-competitively. But others would argue that a lot of this is so speculative on the part of the CMA, and that in the present day, the adoption of these games into cloud gaming has been delayed because should this deal go through, Microsoft was going to bring these games to the cloud platforms. That's in writing instead of in speculation. Now, Microsoft executives have come out to say we're not giving up on this, essentially. Brad Smith here said, we remain fully committed to our acquisition with Activision Blizzard and will appeal today's determination by the CMA. Here's our statement. It's pretty short, might as well read all of it. We remain fully committed to this acquisition and will appeal. The CMA's decision rejects a pragmatic path to address competition concerns and discourages technology innovation and investment in the UK. We have already signed contracts to make Activision Blizzard's popular games available on 150 million more devices, and we remain committed to reinforcing these agreements through regulatory remedies. We are especially disappointed that after lengthy deliberations, this decision appears to reflect a flawed understanding of this market and the way the relevant cloud technology actually works. This is from Brad Smith, Vice Chair and President at Microsoft. And then on the Activision side of things, here we have Lulu Cheng Mestervy, EVP Corporate Affairs and CCO at Activision Blizzard, putting out this tweet. The CMA's report today is a major setback for the UK's ambitions to be a tech hub, and we will work with Microsoft to reverse it on appeal. This report is also a disservice to UK citizens who face increasingly dire economic prospects, and we will need to reassess our growth strategy in the UK. Global innovators, large and small, will take note that despite all its rhetoric, the UK is closed for business. Also insisting that this deal is far from over and that they'll continue to fight is gaming industry's devil himself, Activision CEO Bobby Kotick. Here are bits and pieces of the statement that Bobby Kotick published shortly after the CMA's deliberation. This isn't the news we wanted, but it is far from the final word on this deal. Alongside Microsoft, we can and will contest this decision, and we've already begun the work to appeal to the UK Competition Appeals Tribunal. We're confident in our case because the facts are on our side. This deal is good for competition. At a time when the fields of machine learning and artificial intelligence are thriving, we know the UK market would benefit from Microsoft's bench strength in both domains, as well as our ability to put those technologies to use immediately. By contrast, if the CMA's decision holds, it would stifle investment, competition, and job creation throughout the UK gaming industry. See, when Bobby Kotick says things like this deal is good for competition, it kind of makes you squint, doesn't it? Because it's freaking Bobby Kotick. I don't know if this deal would actually be good for competition. On the other hand, I don't know that this deal will stifle competition on the level that Sony and the CMA suggest. Here's a take from Windows Central, which does a lot of coverage on Microsoft and Xbox, stating that Microsoft has offered to include Call of Duty, etc. in cloud platforms, including NVIDIA's GeForce Now, which as a result of this ruling will no longer get access to Call of Duty. The block does nothing to protect the so-called cloud gaming market and does everything to protect PlayStation's leadership position while harming the potential growth of cloud gaming services. Their cloud gaming arguments are less substantive and vague, however, since it deals with crystal ball predictions and subjective opinion. Nobody knows what could or would happen with the cloud gaming market in the future, making it an easier argument to present than the alternative, which would boil down to we want to protect the market leader. Once again, like the FTC, the CMA's decision here seems entirely ideological. Again, this all just feels like the CMA's trying to bail out and protect the market leader. This decision makes absolutely no real-world sense, but that's par for the course with the British establishment, which is becoming well-versed in making self-damaging decisions in recent years. The article closes off by pointing out that this appeal should it have any chance of succeeding, could mean that the deal will be pushed all the way back to 2024. And that's a big if. There's a good chance that the UK blocking this deal has killed prospects for this deal to succeed entirely, according to Aaron Glick here, a merger arbitrage strategist at TD Cowen, who said, based on a quote obtained by Bloomberg, essentially, there has never been a successful appeal in the UK on an antitrust decision. There does not appear to be a path forward for Microsoft. Now, that's not to say that Microsoft couldn't pull a first. It's not an impossible scenario. It's just a highly unlikely scenario that this appeal will be successful given history, given the track record of UK regulators. And we're now at a point where many expect that this entire deal, this entire acquisition, will actually just fall through. Jess from Windows Central tweeted here, "Wonder where Xbox goes from here. I fully expect the deal to fall through in the coming weeks/months. It's a little bit like being back to square one." And here is another industry pundit who said, honestly, like Microsoft has an ass ton of money, invests deeply in nurturing first-party teams, make third-party deals just like Sony does. Hell, their war chest is 10 times the size of Sony's. They could easily be competing. That's the thing. If this deal doesn't go through, it's certainly not the end of the world for Microsoft. They'll be fine. And yes, I do agree that Microsoft has to do a better job with investing in what they already have now. They have plenty right now. And so far, their releases have been underwhelming. Redfall came out recently. That game is a disaster. And a lot is riding on Starfield. So they really have to start upping their quality of output and the consistency of that quality output in the coming months and years. And then to close things off, here are some more hot takes from games industry pundits, journalists, you name it. Here we have another tweet from Jess making fun of the CMA's argument that while it's a benefit to consumers that Activision games would end up on Game Pass, Microsoft would have all the incentives to increase Game Pass prices, ultimately harming consumers. Jess's response is a satirical quote that reads, "It benefits consumers that they won't have to pay $70 for games, but oh my god, what if they raise the price from $10 to $11 for Xbox Game Pass?" Here's video game industry analyst Matt Piscatella, who tweeted, "The takes are hot and flowing today. Anyways, in my opinion, it's ought to point to what a market may or may not look like in 10 years to block something today. And the cloud market isn't growing all that fast. Whole thing seems a bit off. Oh well, off to appeal everyone goes." Again, whether you're for or against Microsoft's acquisition of Activision Blizzard, the fact still remains that a lot of the arguments provided by those very few who are against this acquisition happening, Sony, the CMA, you name it, it's all been very shaky stuff, but ultimately entities like the CMA have great power in determining the fate of this deal. And they've decided, nope, this is not something we want to see go through. A lot of people talking about how unexpected this all was because the odds looked pretty favorable for Microsoft when the CMA deliberated in March that Sony's arguments surrounding Call of Duty and how Xbox would want to remove Call of Duty from PlayStation and make it exclusive and how that would be beneficial to Xbox's business, how all of that was a moot point. And so, somebody asked here, oh my, was this expected? Jason Schreier said, nope, the Financial Times reported it was expected to be approved by the UK. And then last but not least, Tom Warren here provides more insight into the CMA's arguments surrounding cloud gaming and how that became the linchpin to block this merger between Microsoft and Activision Blizzard, tweeting, "I said back in September that Call of Duty concerns were just noise and that the larger regulator concerns would be Microsoft's leverage of Windows and Azure for game distribution in the future." And here's the CMA today on Microsoft's recent cloud gaming deals. As for what he tweeted back in September of 2022, I think there are bigger concerns around Microsoft's Activision deal than Call of Duty. Microsoft can leverage Windows plus Azure unlike competitors, and it can influence game distribution and percentage revenue share across the industry with Game Pass. Look at Minecraft. The Call of Duty concerns are just noise. It is true that Microsoft owns the biggest operating system in the world and one of the biggest cloud platforms in the world as well. So, I guess on some level it could be argued how Microsoft could leverage that to promote their own stuff. It's worth noting that Azure is what powers things like GeForce Now, Luna, and other big streaming services. So Microsoft, being sort of the owner of the service that so many other competing cloud platforms rely on. Is there some way they could exploit that to further their own goals, to get ahead of the competition and stuff? So there are considerations like that that may potentially give the CMA's arguments a bit more credence. But at the end of the day, this is all just a very complicated situation with a lot of different opinions on multiple sides. And time will tell whether Microsoft's appeal will ultimately be successful. The odds are not in their favor. The current consensus seems to be that the Microsoft acquisition of Activision Blizzard deal is pretty much as good as dead with this, that this might be the nail in the coffin for it, but nothing's 100% determined yet. But I'll be sure to keep you guys updated as all of this continues to play out. In the meantime, though, let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on the CMA's decision to block Microsoft acquiring Activision Blizzard. Do you think the CMA is justified? Do you think this will be beneficial or detrimental for the games industry, for customers? How do you think this will all ripple out? And do you expect that down the line Microsoft will be able to successfully appeal, or do you think that this deal is as good as dead? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.